Hi all. In this video I will narrate a Nazi propaganda article from February 1944, which covers the Luftwaffe's night fighters and RAF Bomber Command's nighttime bombing raids of German cities. This article, published in the Luftwaffe-affiliated Der Adler magazine, was written by Siegfried Kappe, a German military correspondent and Nazi Party member who wrote many articles during the war. While the article was undoubtedly biased by the author's own views, ideology, and the censorship that existed in Nazi Germany then, it nevertheless shows some of the ways the Nazi government and its media arms sought to frame the nocturnal air war over Germany at the time. Despite the Luftwaffe's demonstrable failure to halt RAF nighttime bombing raids during the previous year, or prevent the destruction of cities like Hamburg, the reader was encouraged to believe that a growing and more capable night fighter force was inflicting increasingly serious losses on the RAF night bombers, leading to less effective and destructive raids on German cities. Though the article and author promised no sudden possible end to RAF night raids due to the technical and tactical nature of the night air war, a positive long-term trend for the Luftwaffe was highlighted, implying the eventual defeat of RAF Bomber Command and its night raids on German cities. Night Air Battle Part 2. The Great Task of the Reconnaissance Aircraft. Diversionary maneuvers which failed. Successful night fighter pilots recount their experiences. By war reporter Siegfried Kappe. The battle in the dark night begins. The takeoff order has been given. Shortly afterwards, the first aircraft raises into the air. The crew it carries is less visibly concerned with the successful outcome than the great majority of others, but is nevertheless one of the most arduous and above all important tasks in the night battles to perform. This aircraft is the German reconnaissance plane which must keep track of the enemy formation, so that by its observations it can so supplement the large number of other reports that the Night Fighter Command can obtain an absolutely reliable picture of the enemy's position, and can thus employ its own forces to obtain the greatest possible success. This reconnaissance aircraft is to our night fighters approximately what the Pathfinder is to the British. He flies into the uncertain night, ahead of his comrades. The picture of the dark heaven and the dark earth is his world. The battle, which will later be fought out with thousands of searchlight beams, bursting shells, and multicolored flares, is now well known to him from his many night operations. Like a map of the Reich, the countryside below him is spread out in his memory, with all its outstanding characteristics. What is that town ahead? Where are the searchlights? How long have we been in the air? What is our course? What is that river? It must be Frankfurt on Main. How could he observe, check, and report everything so quickly if his experience had not given him such a clear picture that he can find his way about the whole of the main defense areas without the aid of maps? It is true that his crew helps him, and the close cooperation between the men in the cabin is of decisive importance to success, but decisions can only be taken by one man, the pilot. Cascades over the town. Are the terror bombers going to attack? Two lines of incendiaries fall from north to south. If these are followed by HEs, no, the enemy is flying on further. 20 kilometers east of the town, the British drop more flares. The Pathfinder has marked a turning point for the formation. The enemy changes course. He must be pursued through all his diversionary maneuvers up to the real target, and the latter must be recognized early enough for the Air Defense Command to employ its reserves in time. This is the reconnaissance pilot's greatest task, and if he solves it correctly, his success is no less than that of the crews who actually shoot down the attackers. The Tommies are carrying out a diversionary maneuver in grand style. They are flying in several waves towards southwest Germany, dropping cascades over several towns to lead the Germans astray. But the reconnaissance pilot is not misled by these feints. He follows the main force, which first continues towards the east and then flies over central Germany towards the northeast. The Tommy is trying to mislead us. No raid on Frankfurt. No raid on Würzburg. Diversionary raid on Stuttgart. And half an hour later, the lieutenant can send in with certainty the report which will give the word to our air defenses, already on alert, to make their decisive and concentrated effort as the terror bombers are approaching the southwest towards the Reich capital. This was the night of 26-27 November 1943. Searchlights and lines of flares. Night fighting is not based on chance. It has a highly sensitive system which, with its high degree of mobility, adapts itself to every change in the enemy's tactics, and yet has certain basic qualities, such as must belong to every weapon. The enemy encroaching upon the Reich territory is open to constant attack from this moment until its return over the sea. Night fighters, flak, and searchlights work hand in hand, and the cooperation of all arms is of the utmost importance. Just as the enemy uses certain flares as points of reference for his crews, the German night fighters also has his recognition signals for use if he should inadvertently enter the combat zone of the flak. If one of our night fighters, in the confusion of battle, is lit up by searchlights, he can identify himself as a German aircraft by means of light signals whose compositions change day to day. Cooperation between the three branches of the German air defenses is based on exact observance of the conditions laid down for the battle in question. It is quite possible that in certain weather conditions, for example, the flak will be ordered not to fire, or that its height of fire may be subjected to certain restrictions on this one night. Below this limit, in the areas protected by the flak, the night fighter will not go into the attack, but start it from outside the zone. For example, if the flak has badly damaged an enemy aircraft but not shot it down. The number of aircraft which are hit by the concentrated flak fire above the target and, with wounded and dead on board, leave the formation and are shot down is particularly high. Above the target, the air battle generally takes place at great heights. The British have written much about the methods of air defense in Germany. One point emerges clearly from all their statements, whether true or false. The strength of the German defense has increased tremendously. British pilots report that the night is as bright as day, when hundreds of searchlights and parachute flares light up above the target. The Germans have laid down paths of light in which, within a wide area, all the aircraft in the formation can be recognized. Hundreds of night fighters had hurled themselves at them, and the four-engine aircraft were falling from the sky to right and left of them, like burning torches. What the terror airmen have said is only confirmation for us. On its first appearance, the path of flares was a great surprise. Searchlights and paths of flares together bathe the night sky, particularly on moonless nights, in light, which considerably facilitates the task of the German defenses. Even when the target is covered by a layer of cloud, the power of the searchlights, which are reflected from the base of the clouds, is so great that the enemy aircraft stands out above the cloud like a shadow. The paths of flares are laid down on all sides, and the aircraft which was previously recognizable only as a dim outline now becomes visible as a black patch. Night fighter operations, then and now. 3 years have changed the face of the war in the air. Whereas development at first was slow, it has of late considerably burst the narrow bounds which in 1941 were regarded as the possible utmost limits. Even though up to this time the enemy used few aircraft at night in his raids on Germany, this does not mean that the task of the night fighter was easier than today. It is true that the enemy had no aircraft with such powerful defensive weapons, but we also had much less fundamental experience of air defense. Today we have to deal with the opposite conditions, and it's not possible to say which aircraft has been the most difficult to shoot down. There is the additional factor that in small raids up to 1941, the night fighter almost always came into contact with one raider only, whereas today he is frequently opposed by several bombers ready to defend themselves. A certain balance has, however, been brought about by the considerably more powerful and heavier armament of our night fighters, the effectiveness of which the British have been forced to recognize for some time past. In order to give a brief outline of the various different phases of the rise to success which the German night fighter arm has experienced in particular during recent months, we are printing the following accounts by the late Hauptmann Moira, holder of the Oak Leaves, of 3 of his victories, which were obtained each under very different conditions. His first, 25th, and 50th victories are examples of these conditions. The first victory. The Hauptmann reported, "It was during my 5th operational flight that I experienced my first contact with the enemy. This was during the days of the old style of night fighting. Our only aids, apart from our eyes, were the searchlights. We kept thinking that one of the enemy planes would be caught in them, but were repeatedly disappointed. At last, however, the searchlight suddenly formed into a cone and picked up a Tommy. A twin-engine Wellington was caught full in the light and was making vain efforts to get out of it. The first enemy I had ever seen. My first feelings was not one of complete certainty, but this is a moment which everyone must overcome. I then approached the British aircraft at top speed from behind and gave him a good peppering. He caught fire immediately but did not crash. I therefore had to let the Wellington pass by above me and went into my second attack from the rear. After that, everything happened very quickly, and I had won my first victory. The 25th victory. The Hauptmann reported, "The Tommy loves to come at full moon. Navigation, approach, attack are all easier for him then. But our defenses too are more successful. Our technical development had made great strides. Even without the aids of searchlights, the terror bombers could not get away from us. The sky was fairly bright when I saw the 4-engine bomber like a shadow below me. I approached him quietly, pressing my firing button, and he began to go down immediately. Let us look at a moment what the enemy himself said about it. I suddenly found myself in the open. There was a terrible explosion. The left wing broke off. Our machine went into a spin, and I was flung out of the aircraft by the centrifugal force. Mechanically, I pulled open my parachute. I think I was the only one who got out. But night fighters? I was quite certain that we had been hit by flak. A night fighter cannot shoot down a plane as quickly as that." The Hauptmann supplemented these words by remarking that the majority of British airmen shot down have no idea how it happened and what is really the trouble. On the whole, very few of the terror crews are saved. The 50th victory. The Hauptmann reported, "This was a typical case of an operation in bad weather. The Tommy no longer comes in moonlight, as then the losses he suffers are too high, and in bad weather it is naturally much more difficult to shoot down an aircraft. The Tommies thought that we should not be able to attack them in such weather. They were mistaken, for it would have to be very thick to keep us down. From the point of view of flying, these operations are the most difficult conceivable, although our instruments are constantly being improved. Nevertheless, once an enemy has been picked up by our instruments, and he has gotten in our sights, we do not let him go again. I was flying between two thick layers of cloud, practically without visibility. There, a giant tail unit in front of my nose. I fired. The fellow did not catch fire. I tried again and suddenly found myself in a vertical dive. In such weather, it's impossible to see the horizon and one cannot watch the instruments during an attack, and it was only because of my great speed that I realized that something was wrong. The Sterling must therefore have been fatally hit, for it was going down steeply. We found the wreckage the next day. 3 types of battle. A general survey of the possibilities of night fighting brings to light 3 different types of operations. Firstly, the battle in the night fighter patrol area, where the enemy is attacked during his approach to and return from the target. Secondly, the battle over the wider area, i.e., the pursuit of the enemy over the whole of his route. And thirdly, the air battle over the actual target attacked. It is not always possible, owing to the weather, to organize a defense on this basis. If, however, the system can be applied in its entirety, the enemy losses are considerable. Battle in the night fighter patrol zone. The air victory which is won here is attributed not only to the utilization of flying experience and the ability of the crew, but also, above all, to the high stage reached by German technical development. Not infrequently has it happened that a night fighter has shot down several opponents within a short time, and in a restricted area. Of decisive importance is the control from the ground, and the fact that the night fighter pilot must maintain his ability to concentrate in spite of the frequently long and tense waiting. Vectoring onto the enemy, getting a visual on him, and then the victory is frequently won with the first burst of fire, as a result of the 2 first conditions. More than once, successful night fighter pilots have attacked the enemy on 2 sorties, during both outward and return flights. And we are reminded of oak leaf holder Hauptmann Kanaka, so feared by the Tommies, and his comrade Oberleutnant Gednier, who shot down 5, 6, or even 7 aircraft in one night. Hauptmann Kanaka once had the experience of seeing 2 British bombers crash at the same time, as one had been fatally damaged and had dragged down its neighbor with it. Pursuit over wide areas. 3 aircraft shot down during one sortie no longer constitutes a very rare feat. But the 3 victories which Oberleutnant B achieved during a raid on Berlin represented an ideal case, as he pursued the enemy from his crossing of the coast of the Western Territory as far as Berlin, and spent most of the time actually in the middle of his formation, and shot down the enemy before he could drop his bombs. To hunt out the enemy formation, to remain calmly in their midst after finding his way into the formation, not to allow oneself to be diverted from the task in hand, and even in the face of the heaviest defensive fire from the bombers to take only that evasive action which will enable one to return immediately for a fresh attack, all this requires calm determination. After a short burst of fire, the 4-engine bomber was burning slightly, and the second attack, after a good deal of weaving and turning, brought it down. His second victory he obtained only a few minutes later near Brunswick. 20 rounds of cannon fire finished off his opponent. Not far from Berlin, he got his third enemy bomber in his sights, and this one too crashed after the first burst of fire. In 5 sorties over similarly great distances, he won a total of 9 air victories. Air battles over the target. This is a battle which entails particularly high strain and the utmost concentration, for not only do flak, searchlights, and enemy aircraft meet here in a narrow zone, but also the German fighters are everywhere and on the lookout for the enemy. The collaboration of all arms reaches its climax in these operations. The night fighter pilot must be constantly on the alert, for he must react just as rapidly as the attack begins. The utilization of every situation, however suddenly it arises, alone guarantees success. An example, it took Oberleutnant B not quite 12 minutes to shoot down 3 4-engine bombers over the blazing town. Every crash must be confirmed. When the Deutschlandsender has resumed its programming after the raid, when the sirens have sounded the all clear, work in the command posts of our air defenses has by no means finished. It continues right through the night and into the next day. The enemy's return flight is followed exactly, and if the tactical conditions are right, his movement's hampered. At the battle HQ of the Night Fighter Command, the various units claims to have shot down enemy aircraft are collected. A first incomplete picture shows us the approximate success of our defenses. The victories reported by us are absolutely certain. Every crash must be confirmed before it can be included in the total number of aircraft shot down. An enemy aircraft which has been reported as having been shot down over German territory, but whose wreckage cannot be found, is not taken into consideration in the final report. Thus, the German figures always give us a true picture of our success, which are, if anything, minimized. There was a time when 30 or 40 small bombs were painted on the British bombers shot down, indicating the number of terror raids they had carried out on Germany. Those days are over now. Great Britain has lost the elite of the RAF during its night raids on Germany. An experienced night fighter pilot can always tell immediately whether he's dealing with an old fox or young hare. And more are young hares than old foxes.